My parents wrote me out of their will, not because I was cruel, not because I had failed them, but because I was never like them. They didn't like the way I lived, the man I married, or even the clothes I wore. I was not polished like my sisters, or ambitious like my brothers. To them, I was the odd one out, the daughter who did not fit the picture they wanted to show the world. I found out the day after my mother's funeral. We were gathered in the lawyer's office, the scent of lilies still clinging to my coat. My brothers sat tall in their suits, my sisters whispering in pearl necklaces, the perfect image of the family my parents always wanted. And then the lawyer read the words that hollowed me out. To our beloved children, except Margaret. My name cut out like it had been erased with a blade. I didn't hear the rest. The blood rushed in my ears, drowning out the details of property, stocks, and heirlooms passed down. When I finally looked up, I caught the smirk on my eldest sister's face, as if she had won some quiet war I never knew I was fighting. Later that evening, I stood in the kitchen of the house I had worked for, paid for, lived in. My brother Martin poured himself a glass of my wine without asking, and said almost kindly, "It's for the best, you know. You wouldn't have known what to do with their estate anyway." I stared at him, wondering when my family had decided I was less than them. When exactly had I become a stranger in the bloodline I was born into? I wanted to ask my mother, how could you? How could you love me enough to hold me as a baby, to tuck me into bed as a girl, and then erase me there as a woman? But the grave cannot answer. What my family didn't know was that I had been preparing for years, preparing for the day they would finally show their true colors, preparing to protect myself in ways they could never imagine. They thought they buried me with that will. What they didn't realize was that I had already started writing my own. But to understand how I came to this moment, to the night I stopped being their discarded daughter and became something far stronger, I have to go back to the beginning. When I was a girl, my father used to tell us that reputation was everything. A good name is worth more than gold, he would say, staring at me longer than at my brothers or sisters, as if he already knew I would be the one to tarnish his. My sisters grew into the roles he carved for them: quiet, presentable, married to men with stable careers. My brothers wore ambition like armor, chasing promotions, investments, power. And then there was me, who fell in love with a man who worked with his hands, who preferred books to parties, who raised our children without ever caring how it looked to the world. My parents tolerated me for years, but never with warmth. Love, perhaps, but conditional, fragile. The distance widened when my husband, Peter, passed. I was 49. Cancer, quick and merciless. My parents came to the funeral, but afterward, my father whispered to me, "You'll have to think carefully about what kind of example you're setting now. People will watch." He was not speaking of grief. He was speaking of propriety. I realized then I was an embarrassment he hoped to manage. For the next 20 years, I built my own life, separate from theirs. I raised my children, worked, saved, and bought my own modest home. My parents rarely visited, my siblings hardly called. But still, some part of me believed that blood was thicker than the silence. That belief shattered in the lawyer's office. The weeks after the funeral were a blur of polite exclusions. My siblings gathered for dinners without me. They arranged family photographs and sent them to relatives with me cropped out. They had been waiting for this moment, and I had been blind to it. One night, I received a call from my sister Helen. She asked in that honeyed tone she used for clients if I might consider moving out of my house so that Martin's son could buy it at a family price. When I asked why, she sighed. Margaret, you don't really need it, do you? You're alone now. The estate is complicated, and we think it would be easier if you contributed. Contributed. As if my exclusion from the will had not been contribution enough. As if I was expected to step aside, hand over what little I had, and smile. I did not answer her then, but I began writing in a leather journal, late at night, by the yellow light of my kitchen lamp. I listed what they had done, what they had taken, and what they had underestimated about me. That journal became my map. The first step was knowledge. My parents had built their estate on property, several parcels of land, some old family homes, and one commercial building that had been in decline for years. My siblings thought they controlled it all. What they didn't know was that my father had once asked me, long ago, to help him organize his documents. He had been careless, and I had kept copies. I still had them, hidden away. And those papers told a different story. Among them was a deed, signed but never filed, transferring a portion of property to me. A brick commercial block on Fairview and 3rd, the building with the blue awning where the pharmacy used to be. It was dated 15 years earlier. My father must have forgotten, or perhaps assumed I would never find it. But I had it now, and it was legal. I consulted a lawyer, quietly, carefully. Her name was Ruth Delgado, a woman in her 70s who had hands like folded linen and a mind like polished steel. She confirmed what I suspected. The deed was binding, if recorded. I owned something they believed was theirs. I didn't reveal it immediately. That would have been wasteful. No, I let them circle me first. Let them show their contempt. Because revenge is sweetest when the guilty believe they are winning. Martin came by uninvited the following week, strolling through my garden like he owned it. He wore his success the way he wore his watch, too tight, as if anxious to prove it fit. He pointed at the rose bushes Peter and I had planted years ago. You should let the place go. It's too much for you. We could arrange a sale. And where would you have me live? I asked, rinsing soil from my hands. He smiled without warmth. Helen has a guest room, or there are retirement communities. It's best for everyone. I nodded, offering no fight. He left satisfied, certain I would fold. When his taillights disappeared, I went inside and laid the deed on the kitchen table like a playing card I was learning to flick with precision. Soon, I whispered to Peter's photograph on the shelf. Soon. The Fairview building looked smaller than in my memory. A barber shop, a shoestring cafe, a thrift store with a hand-painted sign. Upstairs, one row of windows wore the brown film of neglect. I stood on the sidewalk with Ruth and watched a boy kick a soda can across the crosswalk. You can record immediately, Ruth said, glancing at the page I held. But I want a title search first. If the estate placed a lien without your knowledge, we need to know. We move quiet, not blind. Quiet, I repeated. It tasted right. When the title report came back clean, Ruth slid the paper toward me and smiled. Congratulations, Mrs. Harrow, you're a landlord. I recorded the deed the next morning. Walking out of the clerk's office, I could almost feel something click into place inside me. The sound of a key turning in a lock I had not known was mine. My first conversation as owner was with the cafe lady, a woman with apricot lipstick who wrote the day's soup on a chalkboard with enviable script. You're Mr. Ellison's daughter? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. I'm Margaret, I said. I'm the new landlord. Her eyebrows lifted. Well, maybe someone will finally fix the boiler before winter. I will, I said, surprising us both with the certainty in my voice. That afternoon, I climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and old paper. At the end, a metal door was propped open with a dictionary. Inside, a tenant hunched over a drafting table, white hair, wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose, a magnifying lamp bathing blueprints in a pale halo. "Mr. Kowalski?" I asked. The name on the mailbox had been smudged but legible. He looked up, cautious. "Yes? I'm the building's owner." He took off his glasses and studied me as if I were a line he had to draw without a ruler. "Then you should know the roof leaks like a gossip." "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I'll take care of it." He nodded slowly. "Your father promised that once." "I'm not my father," I said. The words felt like a door opening. News travels in families like electricity, invisible until it burns you. By the weekend, the texts started. "Darren, heard you filed something with the clerk. Coffee?" "Helen, we should discuss Fairview. There are tax implications you don't understand." "Martin, this is reckless," I replied to none of them. Instead, I hired a roofer and a boiler man. I started reading leases with a yellow highlighter and a bowl of almonds beside me like a student studying for a test no one expected me to pass. Ruth introduced me to a forensic accountant named Tanvi, who wore soft sweaters and asked ruthless questions. We sat at my kitchen table with boxes of my father's papers, the ones I had copied years ago, and Tanvi's pencil moved like a metronome. "Do you see this?" she asked, tapping a ledger entry. "The housekeeping fund is not about housekeepers. Someone made a habit of calling personal spending maintenance. And this is a transfer from the estate account to a family foundation that seems to have no board and no filings." "Who signed?" I asked. She slid the page toward me. Darren's signature looked smug, even in ink. "Do we call the police?" I asked. Ruth shook her head. "We document, we pressure test, and we pick our battlefield. Court is one option, leverage is another." Leverage. The word felt both foreign and familiar, like a tool Peter would keep in his garage that I had never noticed until I needed it. My children came home one Saturday with grocery bags and worried eyes. Anna's hair had gone silver at the temples without my noticing. Luke had started wearing his father's watch, though he claimed he didn't. They had heard from their cousins, who had heard from their parents, who had painted me as a thief. "Are you okay, Mum?" Anna asked. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm busy." Luke frowned. "Uncle Darren told me you forged something." I slid the recorded deed across the table, and then the attorney's letter confirming its validity. Luke read silently. Anna skimmed, and then read again slowly, which was her way when she wanted to be sure she hadn't missed anything. "They erased you," Anna whispered, "and you found a line they couldn't erase back." "I found a truth," I said. "Now I'm going to use it." They exchanged a glance that was a braid of relief and pride. "How can we help?" Luke asked. "Be witnesses," I said. "And don't let them turn you into couriers for their lies." The first direct strike came disguised as an invitation. Helen hosted a brunch to bring us together. I wore Peter's navy blazer and a calm expression. They sat me at the end of the table near the sideboard, as if I were decoration. Helen began with a speech about family and responsibility. Darren chimed in about tax burdens. Martin made a joke about my new hobby of property management that would have been funny if it hadn't been meant to belittle. I let them finish their performance. Then I placed Tanvi's summary on the linen tablecloth, right on top of Helen's place card. What's this? Darren asked. Arithmetic, I said. And the story your numbers tell. Unauthorized transfers. Personal expenses coded as maintenance. A line of credit taken against the Fairview building 2 years after my father signed it to me. Curious, since the estate had no legal right to do that. Martin's face went the colour of skim milk. Where did you get from the mess you never thought I would touch? I said. And before you accuse me of theft, you should know that I've retained counsel and an auditor. The bank will be hearing from me. If you attempt to collect rent from my tenants again, I will seek injunctive relief. Darren pushed his chair back, metal legs scraping tile. You wouldn't dare. Watch me, I said softly. But you won't have to for long. I prefer to negotiate. Negotiate what? Helen asked, chin high. Truth for time, I said. I won't file a complaint if you unwind the line of credit and return what you took under the housekeeping fund. You will also issue a correction letter to the trustees acknowledging my ownership of Fairview and my right of first refusal on any estate asset adjacent to it. In exchange, I will not make a public matter of your bookkeeping at the Memorial Scholarship Gala next month. Helen's fork clinked against her plate. You wouldn't humiliate us in front of everyone who mattered to Mother. She humiliated me in a notarized document, I said. And yet I still care about her name more than any of you do. Darren laughed, but there was more breath than sound in it. No judge will see this your way. I don't need a judge to see anything, I said. I just need the donors to read. They didn't sign that day. Pride is a slow-moving animal. But the next morning, Ruth called. They've hired a crisis PR firm, she said. That's a good sign. People who plan to fight to the end don't hire spin doctors. They hire new lawyers. I spent the following weeks in motion, patching the roof, replacing the ancient boiler, learning the names of the tenants, and showing up with coffee at 7 a.m. for the crew that scraped and painted the fire escapes. I was not trying to be liked. I was practicing ownership. Every receipt went into a folder. Every small fix was a small insisted-upon truth. I existed. This was mine. I also spent hours in the county records room, the kind of dry silence I've always liked. I ordered microfilm. I read deeds as if they were poems. One afternoon, I found something that made my hands tremble. A letter of instruction my mother had filed with a trust officer years ago. It wasn't legally binding like a will, but it was a map of her wishes. In it, she wrote about me, not as the wayward daughter they described at dinners, but as Margaret who loved Peter and who loves without calculation. She asked that I be given stewardship, not cash, of any property tied to the old neighborhood, because I would protect the people inside the buildings, not just the buildings. I sat there until the records clerk switched on the lights that say it's time to leave. The letter did not erase the will that cut me out, but it cracked it. It revealed a mother at war with herself, the public woman who worshipped appearances, and the private woman who knew the worth of an unfashionable daughter. I took a copy to Ruth. She read it twice. This supports your claim to equitable relief on any decisions related to Fairview and adjacent parcels, she said. And it's dynamite if you choose to use the court of public opinion. But be careful. This is still your mother. I know, I said. I'm aiming at my siblings. And what is your aim? Ruth asked. Not to burn the family portraits, I said. To take the frame away. The bank was easier than the family. Numbers are less sentimental than people. With Tanvi's help, I bought the delinquent note the estate had taken against Fairview. The discount made my stomach knot. It was as if the bank itself had given up on my family's competence. Overnight, I was not only the landlord, but the lender. I sent a notice of default to the estate and CC'd their counsel. The letter was simple: cure the violation or face acceleration. Darren called before sunrise the next day, voice raw. You're going to bankrupt the estate. I'm going to stop you using my building as your wallet, I said. You have 10 days. Where will we get that kind of money? He demanded. That, I said, is not my problem. I hung up and made oatmeal. My hands shook when I lifted the kettle. Strength is not the absence of trembling. It is boiling water anyway. The Memorial Scholarship Gala arrived dressed in black silk and good intentions. We held it at the downtown hotel my mother loved because the photographs looked flattering there. A portrait of my parents stood on an easel near the entrance. In the picture, my mother is young and unsmiling. My father's hand rests on her shoulder like a promise or a warning. I wore a simple dress and Peter's navy blazer. Luke offered me his arm. Anna tucked 2 envelopes into my bag. Just in case, she said. One for mercy, one for fire. Helen greeted guests with a smile that had the tension of a piano wire. Darren worked the room like a politician. Martin hovered near the bar like a man who had already lost and didn't know it yet. When the program began, the MC read a speech Helen had written about legacy. My mother's favourite hymn played softly under his words. A donor at my table dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin. Then it was Darren's turn. He spoke about responsible stewardship, about how the family had always prioritized community, about numbers arranged to sound like virtues. When he finished, I stood. If I may, I said. My voice carried farther than I expected. Perhaps it was the room's acoustics. Perhaps it was that I had finally stopped whispering my own name. There was a soft rustle as heads turned. Helen's smile froze. Darren's jaw hardened. The MC looked at his cue cards as if they might instruct him on how to stop me. I won't take much of your time, I said. I only want to honor my mother by telling the truth she couldn't say out loud. I set the first envelope on the podium and slid out a copy of her letter to the trust officer. She wanted stewardship to matter more than spectacle. She wrote that I should protect the people inside the buildings, not just the buildings. Many of you know that I was excluded from the published will. A murmur. What you don't know is that the estate has, since her death, taken loans against properties it didn't own, mischaracterized expenses, and diverted funds from the scholarship account to cover personal spending. Darren took one step toward me. Margaret. It sounded like a warning and a plea. I lifted the second envelope. I have the bank's assignment of the Fairview note to me, the default notice, and an accounting prepared by an independent auditor. Tonight, before you give in my mother's name, you deserve to know what her name has been used for. Someone near the front said softly, "Oh my." Another voice, colder, "Is this true?" Helen tried to laugh. My sister is grieving. She misunderstands the complexities of lunch at the club on the scholarship card, I asked. Of a maintenance charge at a jewellery store? Of a line of credit taken 2 years after a legal deed placed Fairview in my name? I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was listening. Ruth, from her seat, stood and identified herself as counsel. She didn't make a speech. She simply offered to answer any donor's questions and handed business cards to the trustees. Efficient, contained. I closed the folder. We can fix this, I said. We can honor my mother and help the students this fund was meant to serve, but it requires all of you to demand better of us. And it requires my siblings to step back. I stepped away from the microphone. The room did not applaud. It exhaled. There is a difference. The fallout was not theatrical, it was administrative. The trustees scheduled an emergency meeting. The bank sent emails with subject lines like, urgent, response required. Darren's lawyer called Ruth. Helen texted me 3 times in 1 hour, then stopped. 2 days later, we met in a conference room at the old firm where my father used to practice his small-town power. The same copy of the same sailboat painting hung slightly crooked on the wall. Darren's counsel began with bluster. Ruth answered with dates. Tanvi, via speakerphone, read ledger entries like scripture. The bank's representative, who had been silent for most of the hour, finally cleared his throat. Given the assignment of the note, he said, Mrs. Harrow is the decision-maker regarding default and acceleration. If we litigate, the estate will be publicly insolvent within a month. Helen's face collapsed like a paper cup. What do you want, Margaret? She asked. Not defiance now. Exhaustion. I want what Mother wanted, I said. Stewardship. You will resign from the scholarship board and reimburse the account for personal charges. You will unwind the Fairview line of credit. You will issue a statement acknowledging my ownership and my right of first refusal on any contiguous property. Martin will transfer to me the adjacent lot he took for parking without recording. In exchange, I will not file a complaint or speak further to the press that is now very curious. Darren nodded, as if negotiating with a stranger at a market where he had always paid wholesale. And if we refuse? I looked at the bankman. He slid a single page across the table, a notice of acceleration ready to file. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking. Then we let the numbers take you where they've been taking you for years. We signed that day. Not because they agreed with me, because they ran out of directions to point. Owning is quieter work than fighting. After the conference room and the signatures and the thin smiles that meant the storm had moved east, I returned to Fairview. We fixed the roof properly. We replaced the windows on the second floor with double panes that didn't rattle in the wind. I worked with Mr. Kowalski to redo the fire plan so the inspector would stop writing us up. We held a meeting with the tenants where I passed out my phone number on index cards. Call about leaks, I said. Call about noise. Call if something feels wrong in your gut. I won't always pick up, but I will always call back. I took down the blue awning with my father's company name and had a sign painter letter. A simple word above the door, 3rd and Fairview. No surname, no crest. Just a corner that began to belong to itself again. In the afternoons, when the sun threw a rectangle of light across the hallway, I would sit on the top step and drink tea. I thought about my mother's letter. I thought about the kind of woman who writes one thing on a legal line and another thing where she believes no one will ever read it. I wanted to be angry with her forever. I was, some days. Other days I tucked the letter into a folder with my children's drawings and let the anger soften into a recognition that fear can dress itself as duty and still be fear. Helen wrote to me, a real letter in her looping script that always looked like it was hurrying. She apologized without asking to be forgiven. She said she had been trying to stay in our parents' light and had not noticed she was standing on my shadow. She returned with a check, the scholarship's money she had spent. She enclosed a photograph of us as girls in matching Easter dresses, she cross-eyed and me laughing. I put it on my refrigerator because memory is not a court. It is a kitchen. Martin took longer. He came to Fairview one evening and stood at the edge of the sidewalk like a man who wasn't sure if he was welcome. I had no right to your garden or your house, he said. I wanted everything to look tidy. I thought tidy would save us. Tidy is for linen closets, I said. We are not linen. He laughed once, and it wasn't cruel. He brought a sack of bulbs for the planters, tulips, yellow as the light in my kitchen. We planted them together in the blue hour, when the streetlights hum and the sky pretends it will never turn black. Darren did not write. He moved to another city and took a job at a firm where people did not know his last name, or maybe they did and didn't care. He returned the funds. He resigned. The last thing I heard from him was a receipt, wire transfer complete, arriving in my inbox with the airlessness of a closed window. The scholarship fund recovered. We installed oversight that didn't depend on anyone being a saint. The first thank you note from a student who received help arrived in May. She wrote in block letters and used too many exclamation points in a way that made me want to take a walk outside and breathe. I hung her note next to my mother's letter. One was the past's confession, the other was the future's invoice for better behavior. On the first anniversary of the will reading, I hosted a small gathering at 3rd and Fairview. Not a gala, a community open house. We brewed coffee in giant urns and set out plates of cookies from the cafe downstairs. Mr. Kowalski gave a tour of the new fire escape like a docent. The barber brought his radio and set it to the station my father used to listen to when he shaved on Sunday mornings. I asked the sign painter to letter my mother's name, not in gold, but in modest black, on a plaque. In memory of Eleanor, who loved appearances but loved people more when she let herself. Anna stood beside me and squeezed my hand. "You made this," she said. "I didn't make it alone," I said. "No," she agreed, "but you were the first one who believed you could." People ask if I regret not suing, not dragging my siblings through the courts until there was nothing left but legal fees and a pile of paper. Some days, yes. I imagine the headline, and it tastes like sugar. But most days, I remember the sound the room made at the gala when it exhaled. I remember the feeling of the key turning when I walked out of the clerk's office. I remember the tenants learning my name. There are other properties adjacent to Fairview. Over time, parcels change hands. When they do, I receive a call because I have a right of first refusal now, written this time in lines no one can pretend not to see. I don't buy them all. I don't want an empire. I want enough to keep the corner from becoming a set of numbers my siblings could have moved from one column to another and called it virtue. On quiet evenings, I sit at my kitchen table with my leather journal and write what I have learned in a hand steadier than the one that began the list in those first nights after the will. I write that cruelty isn't always loud. Sometimes it is polite, and that is worse because you can mistake it for manners. I write that evidence is a love language when the people you love won't listen to your words. I write that power feels most like breath returning to your chest when you use it to keep promises, boilers fixed, roofs patched, scholarships sent on time. And when I pass the navy blazer on its hanger, I touch the sleeve. Peter would have loved the fire escape. He would have called Mr. Kowalski Sir, though he was older than both of us, and carried the toolbox without being asked. He would have been proud. They thought they buried me with that will, but they planted me in soil that remembered my name. And when I rose, I did not claw at their ankles. I built stairs. If you want to know how it all began, you could go back to the lawyer's office, the lilies on my coat, the smirk on my sister's face. Or you could come by 3rd and Fairview on a Tuesday morning. The cafe will have blueberry muffins if you're early. The barber will argue with the radio. I'll be upstairs, looking at a ledger that finally tells the truth, answering a call from a tenant who has a leak, reminding whoever is on the other end that we fix things here. That's the inheritance I kept.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.